All right, what do you think, Matt? Get rolling?
Yeah, let's do it.
Outstanding. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome to our VMware Explore Redux webinar virtual event. Now, if you're on here, it's probably because you were not at the one of the three events that Matt and I and Jimmy put on. It's almost a month now. We did it at the first week in
Has it been that
September.
long?
Can you believe that, right? We did one in Portland, we did one in Olympia, we did one in Seattle, and they were all really great events. We haven't done a Redux event, and this was back when it was called VM World, right? We used to do VM World Redux, and it was always our most popular event every year. And then it feels like, I mean, I myself went prior to being an IVOXY employee. I myself went, and I remember, I think it was a Moscone Center in San Fran, and they bounced between Vegas and San Fran. Of course, Europe did it, and Barcelona a lot.
They always
Um,
do one out Europe. Yeah.
yeah, and so we would do the Redux because, hey, end of summer, 3 or 4 days out of a week. It's a Labor right before Labor Day weekend. It was always a very, for me at least, a difficult time to actually get out there. So, hey, I can't go, but Ivoxy, can you go on my behalf? Distill it down. What happened? I feel like as we got into the 20 teens and later on, the hypervisor product, the vSphere ecosystem, yeah, there were a few things here or there, but the hey, check out vMotion as a new feature was kind of not a thing. It was more about, hey, we're a mature product and we made these 8 acquisitions. And check out Bitnami, our Docker repository, and all of these things that maybe they were exciting. Carbon Black, maybe it was something that were more about, hey, let's bring these technologies that we didn't develop into our portfolio. And then, COVID and the COVID response happened. And so it's been a handful of years since we've done this. Now, I don't know if anybody out there has been paying attention, but Broadcom slash VMware is kind of in the news a little bit the
Hey
last
man,
few
that's my
months.
joke. You're stealing that.
Yeah, yeah. So our intrepid Mr. Matt Cozzolino, who has been at IVOXY for now over 13 years, congrats, Matt, and he's a
Thank you.
teenager now, went down there with homework, book report assignment on what's the takeaway from the conference. And so we had 3 on-site events last month, and we wanted to tag on a virtual event for people who couldn't make it. And so here we are today. So yeah, I will step away, Matt, and give you the mic. And really appreciate everybody again's time today. And if you've got questions, we've got the Q&A function rolling here on Zoom. So, pop a question and we'll do our best to answer them in real time. Thanks for everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yeti. And absolutely, please, if you have questions, if there's anything you want to take a look at, that's really where the most benefit's going to happen with this is, I've got some thoughts and what I saw, but ask your questions. Like Yeti said, I'm waiting for PowerPoint. It takes a minute always. There we go. Matt Cozzolino. I've got a couple of ECPs. I've been working with VMware since the 3.0 days. And even before the Broadcom acquisition, I personally felt like it was a very, very stable, very, very good, broad platform. I was starting to do personally a lot of NSX, a lot of networking stuff. So there was a lot of features and functionality there that I was getting excited about, and looking at how we can apply them and how we can use them to solve problems in customer environments. In general, personally, I like to learn stuff. I like to teach stuff. Part of that goes to like my weekend role. I do ski patrol. I'm a professional ski patroller up at Snoqualmie. So if you're ever up there, come say hi. Um, Through this class, we do our training classes. We do have a 50% off for our VMware, our ARIA operations class. So if you mention this, if you go to the site and sign up, mention this, and we'll give you a discount on that class if you're looking for it. So yes, I was there. Redux this year was at the Venetian in Vegas. It was fairly small. It wasn't packed. I personally, this is the first one I've went to, so I've never, I don't have anything to compare it against. But I don't know, like I always struggle with the noise. That's kind of my biggest one. And they had DJs everywhere, right? So there's
Matt, I was at AWS reInvent in like
yeah,
2022, and I have a headache just mentioning that to you right now. So
right.
if it's a little bit smaller, sometimes the quiet can be nice. The relative quiet, I should say. It is Vegas after all.
Yeah, it is. But things like DJs in the lounge area, it just made me scratch my head. I had to prove someone I was there. So there you go. I was actually there. So the joke is Broadcom bought VMware. Right now, I think we're still hearing a lot of the squeaky wheels. Everyone is seeing a couple of things and making a lot of complaints about it, and everyone's throwing their arms up in that. That being said, the messaging from Explore was that Broadcom is taking this product, this VMware product, which really, when you talk about VMware as a whole, is a few products, right? There's a lot of things that go into there, and they're turning that into their marketing, their rebranding, they're changing it into a platform. So currently, we're in the situation where you think VMware and you think hypervisor, right? Truthfully, everyone thinks VMware, they think hypervisor, and that's the first thing that comes to mind, right? But there is more to the VMware ecosystem than just the hypervisor. ESXi is a hypervisor, it does a thing. Your Xbox is a hypervisor, it does some hypervisor stuff, right? That is not the new technology, kind of to your point that you were talking about earlier, Yette. It's how do we bind those all together? And the vision that's stated by Broadcom is deliver the best private cloud platform to accelerate innovation. That's what they've stated. That's what they've said. There's a lot of aiming that way, and when you kind of keep that in mind, you can start to kind of make sense of some of the decisions that are happening. To get there, they had to effectively, I say, flip the table over. Hey, we're done with this. We're going to change it, rip the Band-Aid off, whatever analogy you want to use. Hawk Tang, when he was up doing his keynote, he was saying that a lot of the feedback was, we love VMware, we love the software, we love all of these things from customers, right? And we want the software to work better together. We want to integrate better together. We want the tighter integration. And now what we as customers over the last year, and I expect into 2025 a little bit, we're going to still see the company Broadcom and the organization VMware still figuring out its transition, still figuring out its how it's going to operate going forward. A lot of those are becoming more obvious and more kind of well defined, but that transition is still happening. We'll get into some of the pieces that go along with that, but you can see it internally from like the organization and how products are managed now. A couple of the big driving factors, right, is this slide from the keynote that shows 83% of enterprise workloads plan to move back on-prem for a couple of reasons. One, the cost, and two, the data, the information that you own, right, is important. That's really what makes up your organization. And so not wanting that to be out there in the cloud, be able to be scraped, be able to be learned on for the larger like AI type workloads, kind of that data governance, data management, plus the cost is kind of the big reasons that the 83% number comes about. With that, the private concept, we can look at kind of cloud. We jokingly say internally, like, cloud is just someone else's hardware at some other data center, and fundamentally that's what it is. The more you can own your data in your own locations, then we can have a different conversation about leasing access, leasing space, hardware as a service kind of a thing, right? That's effectively what we're doing when we start talking about the AWSs and the Azures and doing this VMware concept on that cloud hardware. So what's it look like when you tie it all together? Everyone should remember these. I think most of us on here could probably remember these things in the car, right? I distinctly remember when you'd buy a new car and you had to get the upgraded package to get the power windows, right? And now when you buy a new car, they all just come with power windows, right? So these features that are new are now changing to be a standard concept. That thing is what's happening, is very obviously what VMware is doing with the platform, with the product. It's not just the hypervisor. It is a platform, a cloud anywhere solution. And to get that solution, you need some things like this window crank or a power windows, right? And to accomplish that, VMware says, VMware took all of the SKUs that you could order NSX, you could order vSAN, you could order all of these individual components. They said, you know what? They're not individual components. They are pieces that make up the whole. It would be like having to order your steak and your salt as two different orders. So now it's just the 4 SKUs. Along with that, those 4 SKUs, which we'll look at in 1 second, the internal organization changed as well. So talking to some of the VMware reps, some of the employees that were there, everyone said it went from, here is the vSAN product. Here's a product team that is vSAN. Here's the product team that is NSX. Here's the product team that is whatever, right? And now the product is VCF, and the supporting application inside of that product is vSAN and NSX and whatnot. So internally as well, the applications have been, the organizational structure of the company itself has been reorged. So that makes this whole process shed some light, in my opinion, on how that whole process is working. The goal here being that rather than let me bolt this component onto this other thing and connect this to this other thing, now we're all in one org. We all are forcing that interoperability because the platform, the VCF, is what's going forward. Let's see. So we've seen a couple of these. We've got a couple of different levels. The path, the consumption path that Broadcom is presenting is consume foundation, work your way into foundation plus storage if you need some, and then that cloud foundation component, with the idea being that cloud foundation is what's going to help you provide resiliency between those two different sites, connectivity between those two different sites, failover HA, security, being able to bring crypto lockered machines back and scrub them after ransomware attack. All of those are tools and technology in the cloud platform. So you start to get that idea of, here's my AWS control panel and I can order a service out of AWS. Now we can start to accomplish that with the Cloud Foundation platform, and it should simplify that entire ecosystem and process. So standard vSphere Foundation, Cloud Foundation. The big things here that Broadcom has done and is saying is we're going to a per core model. So there's a 16 count minimum, and then you individual cores after that number, and that's what we size and price the environment towards.
Yeah, and in the past, it's been I feel like when it comes time to server refreshes, we've tried to find that. Well, obviously, the first thing is what's your environment require, right? And then the idea of how much growth it factors in, but then headroom, assuming that's all satisfied, it comes down to, okay, what's the sweet spot? And for a while, it might have been, okay, 2.4 gigahertz, clock speed and 12 cores. Or now in a couple of years later, it's 2.2, but it's 16 core. So there's always that sweet spot CPU for clock speed and core density. Now we have to be a little more careful, right? Because if you don't absolutely require the level of amount of cores that might be the most economical from a cost per CPU standpoint, then you have to be very careful with that, because let's say a 28 core CPU at 2 gigahertz clock speed is that sweet spot, but you don't need that much core density. You're signing yourself up for purchases you don't necessarily need now. Now, in the past, you only had to worry about a socket. Now you have to worry about per core.
Right. So that's going to be, I think, one of our, as consultants, one of our most difficult things to do is help navigate that sizing exercise. We did hear some good conversation from customers that are have that, if I'm going to buy a new host, this is the build that I buy. Saying things like, we're changing the way we're building that, and rather than a huge number of cores at that 1.2, 1.5, maybe they go fewer number of cores, but the clock speed needs to be up at 3 gigahertz or something. So there's a couple of different ways to address that, a couple of different ways to navigate that process. But that's going to be the next thing, the next kind of design hurdle as far as sizing the physical hardware in the environment. So let's see here. With vSphere Foundation, that's where we start to get all of the proper tools that we actually need. And this is kind of what I was talking about with the window crank and the power windows analogy. You get distributed switching, DRS, HA, Tanzu, vSAN, enterprise at 100 gigs per core and ARIA operations. All of those things give you a good, proper virtualized environment and let you start having that individual data center and start driving towards that consumption, cloud consumption type of a model, right? So the thing that I think is amazing is that all of the issues I had, for example, distributed switching, 90% of my customers have distributed switching, and then I'll run into someone that doesn't, and I'll have to stop and catch myself and say, okay, well, I need to spend this much longer building the network components and making sure all of that's consistent because I don't have that distributed switch. So now all of those management tools and things that make your life easier, they're just provided. They're just part of the environment now, right? There's no adding for that. And you go to VCF, and now you get the extra kind of orchestration management components. We'll get to what consuming resources in an environment looks like what do we have to do, kind of changing that way we look at and think about the environment. But networking and migration is kind of the two big things that I end up having the most conversations about. And the NSX component and being able to build that VPC concept just like you would on an AWS, on an Azure, is amazing. It's huge. It's a huge game changer in the way we can operate environments. Now I have a way to get that without having to justify, here's this other software that I want to get, here's this other thing I can do. This is going to provide you tools to solve a bunch of problems. HCX is going to handle our workload migration. You can go between data centers. You can go up on-prem, up to the cloud, to a cloud hosted solution. And it'll handle all of the components that go with doing that workload migration, the vMotion component, the storage migration, as well as the network, the load balancer migration component as well. Let's see, DSM, we'll talk about that in a little more detail towards the end. But a lot of orchestration work, a lot of planning, a lot of tying in the broader environment into the lifecycle management of what VMware is saying, your fleet of ESXi hosts. How do you upgrade them? How do you make sure your certs are rotated? How do you do username, password management, that kind of stuff? And then you get the couple of add-ons like the vSAN capacity, right? I need this much capacity out of my vSAN, or I need an advanced load balancer, or I need some specific distributed firewall components that don't fall into that. You need this to be able to operate. Those are extras and add-ons. Most of the time, we've got what we call 3-2-1 customers. So a lot of people have 3 hosts, 2 switches, and a storage array, right? That's not paying the bills for Broadcom. So in my opinion, they're focusing on what's kind of making the payments, right? And that's what we're all seeing. There's maybe more of us in the 3-2-1 size than there are the big companies, but they pay a lot more. So we feel like we aren't getting that love from VMware, from Broadcom as much. Everyone I've talked to is hearing it. The messaging is there from the customer side. Pricing is still the Wild West, in my opinion. Everything's kind of all over the place. But it's kind of focusing in on what the environment's going to provide, what is going to work. How do we navigate that is what I see Broadcom doing and kind of figuring out still at the moment. So that I expect to be some changes. So to put it together and kind of change some of our thoughts and thinking about the environment, us as administrators in an environment running some amount of workloads for our companies, for whatever we do, we have users or server or a device, a robot, a packing machine, or something, or knowledge workers that need to consume an application, right? When you get down to it, that's fundamentally what we're doing. We have this thing that needs to run, which has some data and some processes that are built in, and we have these things that need to consume it. That's kind of the core of what we do, right? So when we distill it down to that, then we can start thinking about that process in a couple of different ways. To solve that problem, right, to be able to present this application to these users, we need to solve some very basic fundamental problems. And this is, I think about putting on like a different hat. I put on this hat. I think as the infrastructure administrator, I put on this other hat. I think of the application administrator. When I'm wearing my infrastructure administrator hat, what it comes down to is that I just need compute and storage at a physical location to run this workload. That's the full one statement, right? That workload, that compute, let me get this going. That environment can be in a physical data center that I own, that I lease, that I pay for in a colo space. It can be another one, or I can lease hardware from a cloud provider in one of their data centers, right? These are all valid options for me to run this compute stack from. And this is a very broad comment, but it's not tied to VMware directly, right? You have an application, you pick a provider, you run your application on that provider. It still comes down to where is that hardware? Is it West Coast, East Coast, my data center, your data center? Still hardware in a data center, right? So that's one. We need to worry about compute when we're thinking about infrastructure. We need to worry about connectivity when we're thinking about our environments. And this is going to facilitate things like our replication data, our client access. You know, if I've got someone sitting in a coffee shop, how do they get into the environment? Do I have some SD-WAN, some SASE endpoint accelerators? Do I do client edge? So I redirect into a 365 environment. All of those are that connectivity piece. Do I have a campus where I need to buy switch and wireless and actually install physical kit? All of that goes into that connectivity piece. All of that is going to exist. All of that still has to happen for your environment, right? And there's some things like this virtualized networking piece that will start to make taking these applications themselves and moving them between environments much, much easier to do. That's, for me, this networking piece is the one that I'm personally super stoked on. So we've got to deal with connectivity, or we've got to deal with compute, we've got to deal with connectivity, we've got to figure out how to get our data replicated between different ways, be it from storage array to storage array, we back it up and replicate it to our 3 different media, you know, all of those components for managing our data and protecting our data. That's one of the other pillars, if you will, for operating an environment when we think about infrastructure. The last 2 are security, right? We got to make sure that the way we're operating is secure. I'm still kind of pontificating a little bit on what to make this, so I don't have an image built for that. I think security should be its own thing, but we also need to be able to operate our environment, be that updates, be that hardware replacement, failed hard drive, that kind of a thing, all so that we can then consume it. So these are some of the tools that we'll see for operating and managing the environment and consuming it later. So those are kind of the things we have to think about, and we'll see how some of these components kind of tie that all together here in just a second. That being said, so we talk about those different roles in DevOps, in infrastructure as code. Today's, as you talk to larger companies, this process will be, do I have pets or do I have cattle, right? The Googles, the Netflixes, the larger companies of the world, they don't get hit by crypto ransomware because they redeploy their environment every 24 hours, less than, right? Because it's infrastructure as code, because it's CI/CD, because it's a feedback loop on their environment. So that's that change of, do I have this one VM that is unique and special, or do I have an environment that allows me to deploy an application and then tear it down and redeploy it, and then tear it down and redeploy it, right? One of those is going to benefit you if there's an issue with your environment. You can say, oh, well, we got hit by whatever, it got into the thing, let me patch that, destroy my environment, and push the new update, and I'm back and running inside of moments, right? Any questions about that? This is this infrastructure or application administrator. It's a different way to look at the environment, and having to change that mindset is really what makes the Broadcom acquisition and what they do and how they're presenting vSphere Cloud Foundation as an ecosystem, as it really starts to make sense. So Cloud Foundation, the specific components in Cloud Foundation that we're looking at, or that VMware has put together, is the compute component, right? So the Tanzu, the vSphere hypervisor stack itself, that's what's going to do that compute side. You run your VMs on one of those two things, or your containers on one of those two things. You consume your storage via vSAN or a storage array using one of the protocols, and then you connect to it leveraging your physical hardware, and then your virtualized networking components, your advanced load balancers, your HCXs to migrate stuff back and forth, and then you manage it with the ARIA suite, right? These are the tools that VMware is putting into the VCF product to give you the ability to solve those problems in the environment. How do I run my compute? How do I provide connectivity? These are the tools that VCF is saying, okay, you need to solve those problems. Here's the tools that you can be able to start to use to solve those problems. To get there, we saw VMware talking a lot about the validated solutions. There used to be the validated designs. Those are kind of blueprints. VMware says, VMware knows if you build it this way, it will have this kind of performance and it will work well. So that's designed to meet you where you are, kind of be a guide, a reference material, and grow with you. The idea being that you don't have to make any changes inside of the vSphere ecosystem, the VMware ecosystem, to be compliance ready. You can lean on that region and zone concept, which if you haven't spent any time with Azure or AWS or any of the cloud providers, that region and zone concept really makes a lot of sense there. So the validated solutions are what VMware is bringing to kind of help navigate that process. Like I was talking, you can get large environments that have multiple racks, multiple data centers, multiple regions, zones, or you can leverage the solution that highlights a consolidated architecture with one rack or 3-4 hosts. So anywhere in between, there's a architecture to work your way up through there as you need it, and meet you where you are with that consumption model. Lots of talk about VCF 9, which is coming out, and keep in mind that there's that reorg, right? So the reorg of the product inside of the company itself happened. So all of the, hang on one sec. All of the, my computer's ringing. All of the tools, all of the things that we're seeing VMware push together for the vSphere, the VCF components, are at the holdup of not project management, but that Gantt chart, that project flow is having to be refigured as well. This was something that was important that they were working on for vSAN, and now priorities have shifted. The reorging is happening. When is VCF 9 going to come out? When are all these components going to get rebuilt? When are these things going to happen? That's still internally getting resolved and figured out as well. As we were having the conversation, we had one of the VMware guys at one of the Reduxes, and I asked him, do we have a release date for it? And he still doesn't have a release date. They don't know when 9 is going to come out. But the goal here with 9 is that we're going to tie all of the components together. We're going to be able to do infrastructure as code, your configuration for your ESXi hosts for your environment is going to be code. You'll get a drift comparison of your environment from what it should be, and you can start to kind of keep everything in lockstep and keep that environment management consistent. What was one of the other ones? Skyline. we saw that get flipped upside down is the way it works. It used to be take the data about your environment and push it to Broadcom to get Skyline to compute on and give you a report. Rather than that, you're getting the answer file, the blueprint from VMware, and you're downloading that and running Skyline locally against your environment. That's changing. And VCF is going to be that place where you log into VCF to manage the environment. You manage NSX, ARIA, vSAN from the VCF instance. You get to see the automation components here. So this is where you'll start to see the workflow that you would be used to if you're consuming on AWS. That dashboard that, hey, I want to consume these many VMs. I'm going to turn around and bill it to the marketing department for the VMs that they want to stand up, that kind of stuff here, right? It'll start to summarize your environment, so you can start to separate that application hat from that infrastructure hat. You can see, what projects am I running? How many applications have I deployed? Where do those applications live? The idea being here that I'm not tied to the physical hardware. I'm not tied to the applications themselves. I can put a data center into maintenance mode and move it back and forth. All of these things are the ability you'll have when we leverage all of the appropriate tools to accomplish those problems or address those problems. We talked a bit the fleet management piece. VMware spent a lot of time on that. Broadcom spent a lot of time on that. We want, air quotes, Broadcom, we want you to be able to upgrade your environment, manage your fleet from a single window and not have to log into individual ESXi hosts to do changes to upgrade stuff, right? One of the big things that kind of kept me from pushing VCF out was that most everyone already has an environment deployed. And so deploying an entirely new environment to just consume VCF was going to be kind of complicated. The idea here is we can deploy VCF now and consume or connect and import your existing environments. And then native multi-tenancy. So marketing can have their own tenant. Inside sales can have their own tenant. They can have their own applications. You can connect them together. Basically, that same look and feel that you get with an AWS or an Azure. One of the automation pieces I saw that was super cool. I like doing a lot of my home automation stuff using Node-RED. And with Node-RED, we can pull a component onto the board and then pin it to another component. So with your infrastructure as code, you can start to do that through the automation piece and start to build the deployment processes, and it'll build a YAML script so you can do it through the GUI, get the code out of it, copy that code, dump it into your config file, and then reproduce it because it's built the code for you to do that automatically as you work through that process. Let's see. So the unified single sign-on, you won't have to. There's a lot of talk about these individual products are solving problems, the same problems independently of themselves. So kind of that single sign-on piece. That why do I have three different products discovering my environment? Why don't I discover it once and give that information to those three products? That kind of work is what was being talked about as far as internal changes inside of how VCF is going to operate and how the products are going to work together going forward. ARIA automation is the piece that's going to handle the self-service and give you that DevOps look and feel, provide you with the Kubernetes and the infrastructure as code component. And then operations is going to give you the monitoring and the dashboards and the reports for your environment. So there's some troubleshooting tools. You can go look at the hypervisor is having an issue and start to correlate that with what's happening on the network or the storage or whatever, because operations kind of has that holistic view of the entirety of the environment. Along with that, you'll start to see trends out of what operations is seeing. So you can see how much memory I'm consuming, how much storage I'm consuming, what's that trend as I continue that dotted line out into the future. What's that going to do to my environment? Oh, let me get a drink real quick. So VCF as a whole, I think it's going to be pretty cool. Again, it's not there quite yet. 9 is where we expect to see those changes. Optimist in me says, yeah, it'll be great. Pessimist in me says they'll still have stuff to do, and it'll be 9.5, 9.6 before we get that fully integrated kind of environment out of it. Also, ARIA is going away, so the name ARIA is going away. All of the tools will still be there. I think it's going to be something to the effect of VCF operations, or just the management platform out of VCS, or something like that, right? So, new features. DSM has been around for a minute. I've not actually spent a ton of time with DSM. I'll kind of put that out there, but I was interested and kind of intrigued by that as a product. DSM is the data store as a service component that VMware is offering. So one of the things that we talk about quite frequently when we're talking about going to a cloud provider is don't just lift and shift your applications. If you truly want to consume cloud appropriately, consume the service that's available for this tool. So the thing there is, don't take your SQL server and run it as a VM. Take your database and put it into the SQL as a service offering and consume it that way. This is effectively that SQL as a service offering. You can see MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL as instances in the environment. You can run it on the graphic highlights vSAN. You can run it on whatever storage. You'll still end up with a management agent, and then a management provider, and then the individual agents for actually running the database services themselves. But then it's all going to be managed through the vSphere environment. So you should get better replication, better database management out of that. Make it a little bit easier for you as an infrastructure administrator to manage the placement and performance of those databases themselves without having to be the proper DBA, right? So I thought the DSM component was pretty cool. There's a lot of talk about AI. That's kind of, I think, the buzzword kind of in general in 2020, 24 has been AI everything, right? I want it to get better. That last 20% is incredibly complicated. I think with most things, that great strides, huge gains, and then you get to that last little bit and it's kind of exponential, right? That difficulty to get that last 10% of AI is incredibly complicated. VMware is taking the approach with AI. The approach VMware is taking with AI is very similar to the approach they took with physical machines themselves. You went to VMware to virtualize your physical hardware, right? And the AI play is being able to present the AI tools and resources to the guests, to the guest OS, to the guest consumption, but not be tied to the physical hardware. So Intel has some AI components on your Intel chips already. Do I need an NVIDIA card? How's that? Do I have to build a dedicated environment with all these resources in it? Or can I leverage the virtualization through VMware to consume some of the AI resources that I already have? One of the things in my experience, what I've seen is there's usually kind of two broad categories of AI consumption. Either I'm an application consumer and the application I'm consuming has some AI components in it, or I'm a developer and I'm developing this own model that I need to do that life cycle on. So those are two drastic different ways. I feel like 90% of our customers, 90% of everyone I work with, most everyone I work with, is going to consume an application and not need to go through that process of building their own AI model. To that end, NVIDIA has partnered with VMware and they've got some prepackaged models out there. The coolest ones I thought is the ability to query your unstructured data, query your PDFs. they mentioned it as asking questions of your PDFs, right? That's what Broadcom NVIDIA was mentioning. So you can get that feedback from your unstructured data, as well as a prepackaged model to build like the chatbot kind of a functionality as well. And then NVIDIA says there should be a storefront type of experience, so you can consume that other packages you want from their storefront and start to use them fairly immediately without having to do a whole build up and spin up for it. Live recovery, that's a fun one. Once you kind of zoom out and start to look at the entire environment, right? If I've got this infrastructure and I've got these cloud tools available to me, and I have some set of data that has been infected by something, I can simply disconnect the network for that environment, that virtualized environment, roll back to a different snapshot, load it up into an isolated environment, run some AI and behavioral analytics on the VMs themselves. What are they trying to reach out to? Scrub the machines in an isolated environment, and then restore it or promote it back into production. VMware has a mechanism in place right now, the live recovery tool set, to be able to do that today. That kind of technology is going to come along with that VCF kind of umbrella. You're going to be able to do this live recovery of an environment with that whole VCF concept in place. Other cool tech that I saw, live patching. So ESX update 3.8, update 3 or better, specifically security patches can be applied to your hypervisor without a reboot. And because that sounds really cool and somewhat complicated, this is how it's designed to work. Partial maintenance mode, update your changes, and then a fast suspend resume to move the workloads onto that new revision, new workspace. When we asked about the speed of that process, it should be on the order of milliseconds. So it's akin to a vMotion as far as like, I lost one packet, maybe, kind of a thing, right? Memory tiering to NVMe. This is one of the ones that's more and more, I'm less and less surprised by things we can do. This one isn't super surprising, but it kind of is cool to see. We can take NVMe storage off of a PCI card, so a dedicated PCI card with NVMe storage in it. We can put that card into your server and then start to tier data to that NVMe card. It's not like a balloon memory driver. It's more akin to if I had a back in the day when I had spinning disk and then flash in front of it and some sort of caching tier. It's more akin to that, in that I'll take my cool data and tier it down to the NVMe instance. As I quote hardware, CPU and memory are the two most expensive pieces out of a hardware build usually. So if I can be more efficient with some of that memory spend and kind of tier that off to an NVMe card, I can start to potentially get more consumption into my hypervisor without having to spend more on that expensive DDR memory to go with it. Let's see. App-aware vMotion. This has been, they announced this at early vSphere 8. I think it's just grown and gotten better and better. Effectively, what you get is the ability to call a request for a vMotion of the guest itself through VMware Tools. So the hypervisor says, hey, guest OS VMware Tools, I'm going to vMotion you, and waits for a reply from the VMware Tools. The VMware Tools inside of the guest OS can then kick off a script, kick off talk to the application somehow, and ask the application to do something, whatever that application needs to do to get itself ready to vMotion. Examples that were provided was I've got a database cluster, and all three of my nodes in the database are serving data. When I call that vMotion, I call a script that says, hey, database, go into maintenance mode. And it draws down its own connections, flushes its memory cache, gets itself ready, kind of basically puts itself into maintenance mode, then replies back to VMware Tools and says, hey, I'm ready. VMware Tools says, okay, go ahead and vMotion. It moves that guest OS. And then once it gets there and moves, it calls the rehydrate on maintenance mode, your guest OS, your application, put yourself back into production, and it can start serving data. High transactional databases, phone systems, things that are very, very latency sensitive, I think is where this is going to be the biggest benefit. 3-to-1 customers, I don't expect seeing that as a huge thing unless you've got this massive app and all of this data, and that's able to run on 3 hosts, right? So that's one of the cool ones I see there. vSAN has grown and grown and grown. It's actually been around for quite a while now. It's not the original. It's gone through a bunch of growth iterations. There is the big aha thing from Broadcom is replication and snapshots through vCenter. So that vSAN storage is a kind of vCenter local concept, and we can start to see storage level snapshots. So we now get that functionality that we've experienced with our traditional storage arrays, the ability to snapshot at an array level or at a storage level and not have it be a VMware snap. So we can do that, and then we can replicate those snaps from vCenter to vCenter, from vSAN to vSAN. The goal here being that my vSAN environment can replicate natively, and I can start to think about my data center as not just I want to put a host in a maintenance mode, but I want to put an entire data center into maintenance mode. And I can do that leveraging some of these vSAN tools. This is kind of where that looks. We still get that vSAN Max component. So if we need bigger storage, more dedicated storage arrays, we can do that. We can stay all inside of that one form factor that is my 2U, 1U server, right? Lots of different ways to build it. You can use the OSA, you can use the ESA. That's the storage architecture, the extended service architecture, the original storage architecture. That's the hardware that's effectively validated to run with vSAN. So that's pretty cool. I think, I don't know. I don't think there's anything anyone is selling that really, like, if you buy this, you don't have to buy anything else. You have to pay for a storage array. You have to pay for the hardware for your vSAN host. So I don't think it's necessarily a money question so much as a how do I want to operate and manage my environment sometimes. And the last couple of ones, I think these are really, really cool. Oop, too far. So the distributed processing unit, these are still fairly new. There's only a couple of people that are selling them. I think Qualcomm is one of them. I think maybe Broadcom is one of the other ones. A DPU is a system on a chip. It's a network card with some other things on there. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's your network card. So it's a PCI card. You have your connections on it. So it's a SFP, it's a QSFP, it's a something, an accelerator, some interconnects, and then a CPU. This system itself, and then some storage. This system itself is going to run ESXi on this card. Think if you take your network card and a Raspberry Pi and you duct tape them together and stick it in your server, that's what this is doing. The goal here is that we're able to take the things that we're asking the hypervisor to do, and keep in mind, if we're asking the hypervisor to do it, it has to do it on that x86 processor. If it's doing it on that x86 processor, it's taking away resources from the VMs, the applications we actually have to present. So we're taking these services that we're running on the host and we're pushing them down to that DPU. So things like the NSX, the tunneling between NSX endpoints, the overlay network management, the distributed firewall, all of that kind of stuff. Today it's all networking. You can see that they're going to end up pushing things like storage down to that. All of those system services will run on that SmartNIC and kind of take some of the load off of that x86 processor. This is one of the ones I see. I'm looking forward to having this be an orderable item on my like Cisco config on my server configs when I'm building new server hardware for people. So that's really it. It was mostly, hey, we Broadcom bought VMware. This is what we're doing. What do you think? What are your feels on it? The floor wasn't packed. I think Intel and VMware were the two biggest booths, and everyone else had 20 by 20 carpet, and that's all that it was. A bunch of monitoring stations in the back, people selling point solutions with their one little table, kind of a monitoring stuff. Not a lot outside of that. It was fairly small as far as the vendor floor goes, and then the hangout area. So, yeah. Questions?
Sorry, is anybody here that's attending already been on already been switched over to the new license tiers? I'd be curious to know if anybody's already shifted over or if they're still on the perpetual socket-based licensing. And I believe the webinar chat works here. So Daniel, can I ask? And you're in the Q&A, so I don't know if the chat is working, but I'm wondering if what tier you're licensed on currently. Are you on Essentials or Standard or VVF or Chat's disabled? Okay, well that yeah, that might not be the most effective shape there.
Well, you can answer a question with a question, I guess, but
yeah. Yeah, Maddie, I really appreciate you putting this together. This
yeah,
it's definitely a topic that we're talking to a lot of our customers about. And we are advocates and strive to add value for our customers. I'm speaking completely frankly here, that we've always prided ourselves on being, Matt and I and all of our colleagues, we all come from operations, right? This is not Matt didn't come from Symantec. Matt didn't come from HPE, and no shade on those who have, but I also like to say that we aren't company people, right? We're ultimately operations folks who know the challenges that everybody on this webinar are dealing with, and it's near and dear to our hearts. So to that effect, our loyalty lies with our customers, are the challenges they're dealing with, and we love having honest conversations. We've had tons of conversations about this topic already, and I think we're all here for at least one reason, that it's not an easy, here's your answer kind of thing. That's okay, but we are here for you is really ultimately the message, and we'll come to the right solution based on what the right solution is, right? I like, if I can say some things that I like about Broadcom's direction, I do like that at least they are recognizing the reality and the need for the private cloud. I feel like so much of the last 7 or 8 years has been, let's get you to the hyperscalers by hook or by crook. And almost all the conversations I have with my customers is, regardless of what the C-level might be saying with regards to we are cloud first and all of this, it's the answer is so much more surgical than that. And I feel like the hype and the marketing has been, here's this big wide paintbrush and cloud is the color we're painting, and the reality hasn't always been that. So from that standpoint, Broadcom coming in and saying, hey, we're going to turn vSphere into the platform, and whether that is in Azure or AWS or GCP or near and dear to my heart, on premise with the infrastructure you know so well and have control over, we can enable that. I do like that piece of it, right?
Yeah, that's to your point, Yeti. That's what I always do is I look for the specific problem we're trying to solve. We being you, the customer, and me. Um, that's really where I start. I'm personally annoyed when vendors come in, and I feel like I end up having to run interference because vendors come in and say, "Look at this cool thing, you should buy it." Oh, it'll
That's
solve
that
that
I
problem
struggle
over
with that.
there. I'm like, whoa, wait a sec. That should be the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem I have, and this is
Yep.
what I'm trying to solve. And these are the solutions that will solve some of that problem. And I bring this up because this is truly where I've been spending the majority of my time for my last 13 odd years at IVOXY. I've been spending a lot of time building connectivity between sites and dealing with individual point solution products. And the broader thing that I'm advocating for, excuse me, is looking at that holistically and saying, what do you want to do? Do you, customer, want to have two different data centers? And do you want to be able to fail over between those two data centers? Okay.
Well,
Then that's what
I
we're
would even
trying to
take,
do.
and I know you mean it, Cos, to be even more abstract in that, do you need resiliency? Do you have requirements to be resilient? Can you suffer a 2-hour outage, a 12-hour outage, a 2-day outage? And everything goes downhill from that. And if you don't have the answers to those questions, we can help you define demands. We can ask the questions and make sure we push forward to get the answer. And okay, now we have a set of requirements that we need to design a solution towards. And yeah, product A, product B, services here and there can all go towards it. But very rarely is a product in a bubble the whack-a-mole, in terms of the end all be all of here's the solution because you bought this thing.
Hmm.
Bryce, that's thanks for the comment. That's not the first time we've heard about entitlement issues. There is a policy and procedure in a document and how to get it. And if all else fails, open a support ticket has been that. So if you're still having trouble, let me know on that. But sadly, I'm not surprised to see that you're having difficulty getting support site stuff. A lot of times that has to do with the association of the site ID, which is like your company, to your account. And that seems to be where the ball tends to get dropped, but not always. But let me know if you're still having trouble running that down.
Yeah, that was one of the first sessions I was in was the partner enablement session. So it was all just partners or partner technical leadership. I don't remember what it was. Partners. So it was a partner session. And the backstory to that was they shifted the chunk of data that drove the entitlement, drove that back end. They shifted that from being through the VMware environment to being onto the Broadcom environment. And of course, the data was bad. Nothing was consistent. And then they tried to mash all of the organizations together to make it one holistic view. And it's just clean up the data in the environment is the game that's being played on the back end now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ultimately, I'm eager for VCF9, right? But that, like you had mentioned earlier, Matt, we're probably looking at mid-year for that. And if they're already saying mid-year, if we're lucky, kind of thing.
Well, like I'd expect them to retool the overall VCF project into or roadmap into something that's deliverable now, and then hey, we might need to push this component feature out to
But I do like the
9.5 or
single
something.
platform. I think
Yeah.
Tristan, one of our partners, Pure Storage, Tristan Todd and you might know that name. He had a really great little mini prezo where he talked about his takeaways, storage centric, but ultimately he kind of just came unmoored from just the storage aspect and talked a little bit more about overall the platform and the consolidation of the management and like the SDKs and the APIs that it targets. Matt, you and I, we put on our classes at IVOXY and we leverage NSXT and we leverage vSphere, obviously, and we leverage Terraform and all of these things that plug in. But when we want to make changes, we have to inform NSXT, and then we have to inform vSphere, and then we have to leverage what would be now known as vRealize automation, the orchestrator piece, to do some things. The promise of the unified platform and not worrying about, well, the rev of NSX is at 3.2, but we really got to wait for 3.5 to be able to do this with the vSphere that we're at. That whole kind of consolidation of the management, the panes of glass, so to speak, and the programmatic API access into those that are going to be consolidated, that promise is somewhat exciting too, because now sometimes it feels like, this is a bad example, but let's say NSX is that stepchild that isn't getting the love. It sounds like there's going to be less opportunity for the various components of the platform to be left behind, where in the past it's like, yeah, vSphere might be at 8.0, man, but this component is still running at 6.7, and I have to wait for that to finally get dragged forward before I can upgrade my core hypervisor.
So,
well, if there's nothing else, and feel free to jump in the chat if there is. Matt, I really appreciate you willing to, again, go down to Vegas and pop there. Yeah, the ARIA class, this is one of those things we don't anticipate to have a flood and then a settled in standpoint. The approach to this from IVOXY's point of view is there are going to be a number of our customers who are current Enterprise Plus customers that are going to require to maintain that level of feature. And so they'll be VVF. An enterprise customer, Enterprise Plus, moving laterally is a VVF customer tomorrow. And now instead of just Enterprise Plus, you're also entitled for ARIA operations that used to be known as VROPS, that used to be known as VC ops. We're going back what's old is new again. And so the idea behind the class is, hey, you know what? You're now entitled for this. Let us help you at least get value out of the platform and embrace it and leverage it and utilize it now that you're entitled to it. So we have the ARIA class. It's ready. We've kicked it to the end of this month while understanding it's going to be a little bit of a slow burn in terms of attendance, right? Right now, ARIA operations is a thing, yes, but the promise of the next in VCF 9 is not until, again, next year. So we anticipate we're going to be putting on this class on the regular, probably quarterly, and it's really going to kick up adoption once the VCF 9 platform comes down. But, if you're entitled to ARIA operations now and want to get more out of it, I would really encourage you to take advantage of the discount offered by being on the Redux event and attending a class. Yeah. And Bryce, appreciate you as well. It's always good to see everybody on here. I see some familiar names. I really appreciate everyone taking their time and spending it with Matt and I, and Matt especially, Mr. Coz. Fantastic quality content as always. And again, just know that our loyalty is to our customers, 1,000%. And if you've got questions, we are here to lend the and what we like to think is an expert ear, a well-measured ear. Decades of experience between all of us, and we've seen almost everything we could possibly see in an environment. So, we'd love to have conversation with you if you're needing to have that chat. Yeah.
Alrighty.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everyone's time.